Hey everyone, so today I am talking more about White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. This is the fourth video. The section that I stopped at for today was a section called Cultural Racism. Most of what I read this morning was about aversive racism. So we're going to talk about some of the notes that I made while reading this morning. So here we go. And let's see. White dominance is unremarkable and taken for granted by whites. It is never really thought about. So I think this is the main theme that DiAngelo wants to show the reader throughout this entire book, that white people need to think about their whiteness. Uh, just think about your whiteness more, what that means, what that entails. And here they say that we just take our whiteness for granted. And then she goes on and she asks some questions. Were you discouraged to go to certain neighborhoods as a child? Look at all the segregation there was based off of what neighborhood you lived in. That ended up being like what school you went to. So if you lived in a primarily white neighborhood, that was considered the good neighborhood. You would go to a better school. You would then get, better education in the long run, whereas opposed to the black neighborhoods would be looked at as more dangerous and neighborhoods where you wouldn't want to live in those neighborhoods. And it's all like coded words a lot of times about the difference in the neighborhoods, and it happens all the time on the news and casual conversation, constantly, all the time. And then they talk about school some more. Most people of color have never had a teacher who reflected their race, which is pretty sad, actually. I've had so many white teachers, and I was starting to think I couldn't think of a black teacher I had. I probably had one, but I can't think of one. Just because places are integrated, like schools, doesn't mean uh, that there isn't segregation within that organization. So, just looking at the lunch room in a high school, uh, look how we talk about white versus black neighborhoods. It goes back to what I was saying before. We need to get out of the habit of talking about black neighborhoods as dangerous neighborhoods. Um, the message we give to children is that we should not talk openly about race. So a child will ask, like, Mommy, why is that guy's skin so black or something? And the mom will get upset and embarrassed. And this tells the young child that we don't talk about race, that it's something that's taboo to talk about in public or with people. Also, people with disabilities, like when a child points out a disability, the parent will usually get embarrassed or upset. But these people are in the world. The children need to know who and what these people are, and not be ashamed to talk about them and not to acknowledge their existence. There's a term called new racism. It's the same racial outcomes as those in the past, but without appearing explicitly racist. And it talked about after the civil rights movement. So the civil rights movement showed the brutality of racism on television, and everyone didn't want to be associated with that because of what they showed on television. Before that, they were more openly racist, but after that, they were more secretly racist. Just because, people saw what racism did. Peaceful protesters getting hosed with fire hose, dogs attacking them, beating up black people that were sitting at counters, stuff like that. So after that, some racists wanted the same racial outcomes, but without having to actually say that they're racist. So that's when they changed the coded message, the wording of the messages. We must acknowledge race, if not, it does not accept reality. So this is about the whole color blindness thing. Accept reality. We can't push our reality onto other people. So if I believe that there's no color, and obviously a person of color, they would be like, that's crazy. Colorblind ideology in practice denies the reality of racism. Racial bias is largely unconscious. Aversive racism exists under the surface by educated and progressive adults. So this would be like rationalizing organizations. So, for example, there's not many black people that work at a certain business or a certain company. Well, they would rationalize that away as well. But not many black people are applying. Things like that. And they're using coded words without actually naming the race, without actually naming black people. So there's an example of a white family that bought a cheap home for $25,000, but they had to buy a gun too. They said that part in a joking manner, but they did have to buy a gun. So the coded message here is that they bought a house in a black neighborhood, and so they're saying something that is racist without having to talk about race. So this is like casual race talk. It elevates white people while demeaning the people of color. Racial coding and where people live is a huge part of this. Violent crime in white neighborhoods is characterized as like shocking and a surprise, while violent crime in black neighborhoods isn't seen that way. It's almost seen as, like on the news, as oh, this happened again. This wasn't in the book, but I really hate how crime is covered in the news. I don't like the fact that they show the picture of the person, and I could be way off here, but it just doesn't, I don't know. I don't know if it actually helps to show like the picture of the people or saying their names and telling the viewers to call in and things like that. I don't know how often that actually works, but I know as myself growing up in the 80s and 90s, when you would watch the news, there was this sense that criminals were black, because on the news they would always like show the picture of the black man and talk about what they did and talk about how extremely dangerous they are, and his name would be like Jerome or something. And there has to be a better way to talk about crime on the news, because I feel like that it just reinforces the us and them aspects of racism. Yeah. Let me know what you think of that if you watch and you want to comment. Alright, that was it for today's read. I'll read some more tomorrow, and I'll make a small video about it tomorrow too. Alright.